Hello YouTube. Reports of encounters with a certain tall furry creature, though occasionally, have been recorded in Belarus. Let me describe this land of the encounters because it gets complicated when various locations are presented in this video. But before, let me tell you this. This is a special land in the sense of paranormal phenomena. The only case that I had investigated and had to shut down and destroy all my notes had to do with Belarus. And what I discovered and what could have happened if I published my research and if some daredevil would try to release the phenomenon that I had discovered, what it could do to the world. The case is shut, the leads are destroyed, the paperwork is destroyed, and the phenomenon is no one can find it. I made sure of that. But it was a scary episode in my life as a researcher of the paranormal phenomena of Eurasia. So what I'm going to tell you today is nothing in comparison. These hominid cases, these humanoid creatures, but it's still very interesting. That's what I wanted to let you know about Belarus. And I like the people of Belarus. They tend to be very kind, hardworking people, but their land is full of mysteries. I've learned that. Belarus, officially the Republic of Belarus, and historical Byelorussia, is a landlocked country in Eastern Europe. It is bordered by Russia to the east and northeast, Ukraine to the south, Poland to the west, and Lithuania and Latvia to the northwest. Until the 20th century, different states at various times controlled the lands of the modern-day Belarus, including the Kievan Rus, where I'm from, the Principality of Polotsk, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Russian Empire, of course. In the aftermath of the Russian Revolution in 1917, it became part of the Soviet Union in 1922. There was a brief Polish-Soviet war, not good for the Soviets, and the Belarus lost almost half of its territory to Poland. Much of the borders of Belarus took their modern shape in 1939, when some lands of the Second Polish Republic were reintegrated into it after the Soviet invasion of Poland, and were finalized after World War II. During the World War II, military operations devastated Belarus, which lost about a quarter of its population and half of its economic resources. So, let's look into the mists of time to see the mysterious creatures in those lands. For example, the Polish author Jan Radwicz wrote that in 1661, several bears were driven out while hunting in the Lithuanian Grodno forests. Among them was a wild man who was captured and taken to Warsaw as a gift to King Jan II Casimir. The boy, as he was called, was about 13 to 15 years old. His body was covered with thick fur, and he himself could not speak at all. The Queen of Poland tried to humanize this creature, and as a result, he was taught simple kitchen work. In the end, the creature was presented to the Vice-Chancellor Adam Opalinsky, after which traces of this creature are lost. Karl Linnaeus even came up with a Latin name for the monster, as they refer to it, Juvenus Ursinus Lituanus, young bear from Lithuania. Sometime later, in 1694, the story almost exactly repeated itself. Then, in the Lithuanian forest, the second Lithuanian boy was caught. He was also brought to the court and presented to another king, Jan III Sobieski. Among other observers, he was described by the king's personal physician, Bernard Conner, who later became a member of the Royal College of Medicine and the Royal Society of Great Britain. So, the British spies, they were all over, including Russia as well. But we won't get into that. In addition to Western European, there's a Russian report about this boy. In Poland, recently, King Jan III had a bear man caught in the forest, not saying anything, but only roaring. Shaggy all over, it was ascending the tree. So you can see that the spies from different empires were operating in the Polish, Lithuanian, Belarus lands. It was all intermixed. Alas, it has not yet been possible to find out where the Polish researchers and colleagues and their colleagues of the Belarus team got their information from exactly. But could it be that they refer to encounters with mermaids? Here's the description of a typical captured Belarusian mermaid from the book Bezdonnaya Bagatsa. A long time ago, grandfathers told, two were brought to our village. So they have everything female about them, only big breasts and long hair. And they don't say anything, they just cry and cry. Tears flow like a river until they were let go. Here's another testimony about the mermaids. They're so small, like monkeys, and hairy. Strange creatures are observed quite rarely in Poland. Pan Marek, who is the editor of Radio Paranormarium, broadcasting about the secrets of the world, admits to this. Usually the messages relate to misidentified animals. However, there are many interesting historical legends. It is worth remembering at least about hominids. We're speaking about human-like creatures. An analog of the famous Bigfoot was supposed to live on the former eastern frontiers, on the territory of present-day Belarus. Most of the reports about him date back to the 19th and 20th centuries. According to the surviving descriptions, the ape man had a height of 2 to about 2.4 meters and was covered with dark fur, from under which only the nose, eyes, and mouth stood out. Anatoly Sidorenko, candidate of historical sciences, cryptozoologist from Donbass, also collected a lot of stories about the Yeti. 50 kilometers from Belarus, at the beginning of the 20th century, a peasant was working in the field and decided to have a snack. He lit a fire and began to fry meat and bacon on it. Suddenly the almasty, the Slavic name for the Yeti, came out of the forest. It looked with interest and left. But a few minutes later he returned with a frog and, one might say, kept the man company. He put it on a rod, browned it on the fire, had a bite, and silently wandered into the thicket. There was a strange beast in the old days in the vicinity of the Vargan mountain. People thought it was a wolf. After all, sheep and goats disappeared, and they said the creature had slaughtered someone's bull. But no matter how good were the hunters that ventured into the forest to get it, they returned empty-headed. No wolf, no tracks. Only wild boars in the forest, but they found human footprints. Come the harvest time, and no time to deal with this monster. So the neighbor's daughter, she was young, she hadn't gotten married yet it seems, she went to the forest for something. Maybe to get herbs for her father's ailments, or maybe she was not too bright. People from nearby villages looked for her, but she was gone. The father and mother cried. Well, by the time passed, people began to forget her. So the winter came. With snow came fear. And there were frosts. There have not been such frosts for 100 years. People were afraid to go further than their courtyards and go out because the frost would set in. Hares and small animals in the forest disappeared. They froze to death. And that beast had disappeared somewhere. So they forgot about that girl. Already in the spring, some man went into the forest, ventured far, and he found a den. And someone was whining or crying there. So he came closer and he can see there is a woman lying there, hiding. Dirty, shaggy clothes are all torn. Well, he was able to pull her out of that den. It was not easily done. And then he took her to the village. As it turned out, this is the girl who disappeared in the summer. So those who found her brought her to the girl's parents' house. They're crying, they have nothing to say. You can imagine. Well, somehow after weeks, she was actually able to talk. She told the locals that the wolf caught her in the forest, and then he was big as a horse. She had no other way to describe it, or him. He locked himself up under a snag and lived with her as a man with his wife. But he was kind, affectionate. He carried her around. He kept her warm. It was cold in winter. He didn't eat himself, but he brought the food to the girl. At the start of the spring, he disappeared somewhere, did not come, probably died apparently. And a month later, that girl had a baby, dark, shaggy, but looking like a person. And he lived for a long time and was good with friends with people, although they say that they, I'm assuming the girl mother and the son, were killed in the war. That's how it was. This is what the newspaper Belaruskaya Krynica, published in Vilna, said in the year of 1928. By the way, very interesting year overall in the paranormal history of Eastern Europe. You can find references to strange objects and encounters that took place that year, including underwater and a lake and strange objects falling from the sky. Anyway, so that's what the newspaper said. During the recent military exercises in the Baranovichi district, soldiers found a wild man between the villages of Berezovka and Tartak, who was naked and covered with black hair. The forest man had a wasteland red beard and long clothes on his hands and feet. The hair on his head was so long that it completely covered his face and eyes. When they approached him, he was asleep, and when he woke up and saw people, he howled in a wild voice and disappeared. The relevant authorities probably issued an order to catch this man. Well, a few years ago also, interesting piece of information came from the interview with Polish researchers. And I kind of mentioned this already before, but that's the same one that lived in the eastern frontier. But it's interesting information. It keeps coming up. But what's interesting is that my Belarusian colleagues, researchers from UFOCOM and other organizations, but mostly from there, they recorded cases of sightings of huge creatures up to 10 meters tall. Here's an interesting post-war testimony of someone named Rusinovich from the Svetlogorsk district of the Gomel region. It was recorded during their 2014 expedition. So there was a boy traveling with his dad after the war. There were soldiers lying here and there. And once they traveled after the midnight, where the village club there is located today, they walked a man as tall as 10 meters, they estimated. They thought maybe it was like a mission, a ghost from some soldiers who perished there. The night was moonlit, the boy and the father stopped. The man walked about like 10 meters across the green clearing, very tall, that's what he remembers. And then the wind blew towards them. They drove on a little, and that creature walked further. That's how ghosts can be, they said. Phosphorus here dissipates. In March of 1964, a well-known Soviet cryptozoologist Kaufman recorded a story by Tatiana Anasievna Marchenko, who saw a wild hairy woman when she lived in the village of Kishantsy. According to her, such a woman came to their neighbor. She came only in the spring, and no one knew where she lived the rest of the time. A hairy woman was picking cherries, apples in her neighbor's garden, eating bread that her neighbor gave her. One day, Tatiana Afanasievna went to the neighbor, and this woman was sitting there. When the neighbor left the room for some reason, this woman got up, went to the table where the neighbor was kneading the dough, and tried to knead the dough too, but the flour was gone. Then she was obviously angry because she grabbed the pillow from the bed, tore it up, and began throwing feathers into the dough and kneading it. The hostess returned and seeing what happened only gasped. All the dough had to be thrown away, and she was preparing it to bake bread for a few days. But the neighbor felt sorry for this woman and did not drive her away. This woman did not wear clothes. She was covered with wool. Her eyes were slanted, red. The nose was short, the mouth long. The narrator showed to the middle of the cheeks. She didn't speak humanly, only purred, like a cat, I guess. According to Makarov, the author of the Fundamental Atlas of the Snowman, in the early 1970s, a tractor driver from the village of Mozyr once saw a hairy man hiding in the bushes twice during one day, in the morning and in the evening. Most likely the city of Mozyr is meant, but there is also the village of Mozyr, unfortunately. The author does not give any more details, so we can only assume that this encounter took place in the Gomel region. This sparsely populated forest area is located north of Chernihiv, near the border of Ukraine and the Bryansk region of Russia, also known for its forests. It should be noted that there are quite a lot of large forest areas on the territory of Belarus and the Bryansk region and northern Ukraine, in which no human foot has actually set itself, meaning people don't go there. In wild areas, even now, in 21st century. Another encounter was described to the Belarus researchers by somebody named Duchis, a well-renowned Belarusian archaeologist. Lyudmila Vladimirovna conducted archaeological surveys along the banks of the western Dvina River in 1984 in the Myorsky district of the Vitebsk region. And in one of the villages, the detachment, she was told that they saw an old woman 3 meters tall walking at the edge of the forest and carrying either a bag or a bundle of brushwood behind her shoulders. That's what the detachment of the soldiers observed. Also, 2 stories made a big stir in the Belarusian newspapers of the 1980s. One took place in 1983, when a 10th grader of the Volmyanskaya secondary school, Yuri Maletsky, in April, near the village of Dushkovo, Volozhinsky district, Minsk region, he encountered a 3 to 4 meter tall humanoid creature in an old sand pit. It turned out to be an overgrown with thick fur, which had a shade from the dark brown to black on different parts of the body. A huge hairy head was planted right on his shoulders. The arms and legs were long. The second case took place in July of 1989 in Rakov, in the same Volozhinsky district. In the Young Pioneer Camp Festival, we're speaking about, it's like Boy and Girl Scouts in the Soviet Union, just with the ideology mixed in. Well, anyway, children from the pioneer camp, they were on a walk and they noticed a strange bipedal creature. Its descriptions varied greatly. It was said that it was from 3.4 meters to 25 to 30 meters high. The most accurate description belongs to Ruslan Lutskin, who, according to the children, saw the monster not from afar, but from a distance, how to stretch out his hand. Ruslan described him as a naked giant who was about 3.5 meters tall, covered with thick gray-brown fur. His head was large and human-like. There was no neck, as it seemed to the boy. He also did not notice the creature's nose and ears, but his eyes seemed small. And in early July of 2008, a teenager, Evgeny Mikulich, from the village of Kovali Lida district, Grodno region, observed a certain humanoid animal about 1.5 meters tall. It looked like a monkey covered with black fur, whose paws dangled at knee level. The ape was also seen by the mother of Eugene and the boys from the village of Krasnovtsy in the same district. Evgeny and Eugene is the same name. Eugene in English. Anyway, one of the locals even went to the creature with a pitchfork, but noticed it already on a birch tree located next to a cornfield, so the creature moved fast. After, the newly minted King Kong was also seen on an apple tree in the garden of one of the locals, just a little bit later. A rather strange story which the Belarusian paranormal researchers could not refute during verification, but they leaned toward a natural explanation of all the events that occurred. Of course, apes running in the forests of Belarus. Encounters with some huge creature are still taking place even in more recent times. In 2010, students, for example, informed Alexei Perikod, a professor at the Kiev International University and member of the Kiev Kosmopoisk paranormal research group. Well, they told him that a 3-meter giant was observed by a hunter whose name starts with letter S on the Belarus-Ukrainian border. You see, the Belarus researchers did not specifically give the name of the settlement at the request of the people involved. So S was on a tower of a sort in an ambush waiting for wild boars. Through a night vision device, he suddenly saw a humanoid figure about 3 meters high, which later he called it the Goblin. The students promised to inform about other similar observations if they happen again. Unfortunately, no new information has been received so far. While the famous Soviet and Russian cryptozoologist Igor Burtsev told the Belarus researchers that in 2013 a man came out to him who told him about this encounter with a huge 5-meter tall creature in the forest near Mogilev. The researcher handed over to the UFOCOM organization a video testimony of Nikolai's statement. Let's call it that. And it was from the personal archive of Burtsev, who is an incredibly capable researcher. So, let's talk about the identity of the eyewitness. He himself is from Kazakhstan. He served a long time in prisons, but in the early 1990s he came to Belarus to study. He noticed this part of the forest a long time ago. There was a gap of trees in it that attracted attention, and one of those with whom Nikolai talked about this play said that when he once drove there at night on a cart, a frightened horse suddenly jerked so much that everyone almost fell off to the ground. The horse calmed down when it got out of the enchanted place. Once again, they decided to gather there by the campfire with the company. At some point, the noise of someone approaching them from the forest was heard. Soon, a hunch something appeared from there. So let's let Nikolai talk. Just like that, squatting a little, I couldn't see my legs. And then, what is the height? Bent like that, or does it straighten up, that creature? That's how bent over. He was about 3 or 3.5 meters, and I saw him from 15 meters away. And then, when I saw him, I clearly understood that I was in danger. I say in a whisper, just in a whisper, the boys and girls, 2 or 3, they have already understood. I said, look, in a whisper, barely so that only they could hear. And that's how I said it. Look, he took another step, then stopped, turned his head just like an owl. He has no neck. There apparently the hair covers the neck, straight head, and immediately big shoulders. He just turned his head like that, and just 2 huge red eyes. That's right, clearly at me like that they're looking. My eyes and his eyes interlock. The eyes are round, absolutely round, and the pupils are like feline, red. But I do not know, maybe it was the light from the fire that gave this redness. And you say, okay, so what is the height if he straightens up? Nikolai asked. 5 meters will be. Such a giant, yes. He's so huge. He'll take a cow under his arm without a problem. And then I felt what I think he kind of perceives. Yes, I was just so terrified. That's just how he stood. I just realized that it was time to make a decision. That is, he can, make a decision, let's say, to attack now the creature. But how do you know? Could he feel your thoughts? I do not know. I just have never experienced such feelings. But I felt it simply. I was just seized with horror. I immediately rushed from the spot. I had jumped like for 3 meters, and the second time I pushed off the ground, and what? I didn't even think about friends back there. I just thought to save myself. And although I've never been so cowardly, but at the moment I realized that at least someone needs to be saved. And right in the air, such a thought catches up with me. Tape recorder. We had a tape recorder there by the campfire. It was not even mine. I absolutely did not need it in this situation. Nikolai went back and grabbed the tape recorder, afraid to look in the direction of the hairy lord of the thicket, or the thick forest. He shouted to the others, "Run!" Everyone rushed after him. They reached the embankment, which was located next to the railway track. They caught their breath, and suddenly it turned out that no one except Nikolai had seen the giant, but only heard that someone was coming, and they succumbed to their herd instinct. Well, thus it turns out that on the pages of the non-folkloric literature, once and for all, there will be a mention of certain tall, let's say from 2 to 10 meters tall creature hiding and sometimes coming out into the light in the Belarusian forest. If some of them can be explained by the discovery of the Mowgli children, maybe practical jokes or desire to become famous, then other cases are much more difficult to interpret. It is interesting to note that the eyewitness from Mogilov, who mentioned that the very place where the encounter took place was considered by local people not to be a good place. They shied away from it. Belarus researchers say that they have repeatedly encountered reports from informants who use the term scare, be scared. In certain place, there is certain image, most often fitting into a person's idea of the world around them. Is it possible to assume that the snowman, abominable snowman, Yeti, Bigfoot is just one of such images instilled in the mass media into people's minds and therefore entrenched in the level of archetypes? After all, it's hard to even imagine that such a huge creature of flesh and blood can go unnoticed. In any case, after a close and scrupulous analysis of the data, it turns out that looking for this abominable snowman or Yeti in Belarus is not as hopeless as it seemed. Oh yeah, there are very interesting paranormal phenomena in Belarus, and with time I'll get to more of them, just like Ukrainian, like Russian cases, like the Central Asian cases, and of course other parts of the world. So if you like my research and you can support it, I would appreciate your help. You can see the links in the description to this video on how to do it. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll bring you more interesting videos soon. Thank you.